Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Beyond the Bites, a show that deals with the trending issues of the region. There is little doubt that students and youth these days face an added and extreme pressure to excel in everything they do. While survival had always been a struggle, it is made worse now with rising expectations and modern-day pressures, so much so that many youngsters are driven to take the extreme step of ending their lives. What is the solution to this menace? How do the youths cope with the rising pressures? Can educational institutes play a better role in avoiding such tragedies? Well, to discuss on this key and important issue, we have a selected group of panelists with us today. To my extreme left is Dr. Sangeeta Datta, consultant neuropsychiatrist. Thank you so much, Dr. Datta, for being at Beyond the Bites this evening. I also have with me Loya Agarwala, a student counselor, somebody who has written extensively on suicidal tendencies. Welcome, Ms. Agarwala, to the show. To my right is Dr. Sabrina Iqbal Sarkar from the Department of Political Science, Cotton University, somebody who is very closely associated with the youths and students. And I also have with me Mr. Ranjan Barua, a student mentor who deals with youths, who mentors youths, spends a lot of time with them, knows their psyche. So very warm welcome, Ranjan, to the show. Well, I'll come straight to you, Dr. Sangeeta Datta. Increasing pressure on the students these days, and it definitely looks like taking a toll. What did you say?
Yeah, I agree completely, because there is increasing pressure. There's no doubt about it. The pressures on students is primarily related to academic pressures, relationship pressures, social issues, family issues, so on and so forth. But primarily, when we talk about pressures on students, we have to address the academics first. We have to remember that there are two things. One is competition and the other is comparison. So competition these days, it's called cutthroat competition. You know, you almost cut their throats when you compete. I mean, literally. So here I need to say is competition is necessary, but competing with oneself is important. Competing with someone else is never worthwhile, and it often leads to psychological disorders like depression, anxiety, and later can lead to suicide too. And comparison, see, there's a lot of comparison between students. Comparison, parents indulge in comparisons, teachers indulge in comparisons, the students themselves compare themselves with someone else. So comparison always leads to low self-esteem, low self-confidence, leading to further depression and anxiety, and finally leading to something like suicide. So pressure is definitely there. When we talk about the student society, we also have to understand their age. So in this age group, there are relationship issues, primarily romantic relationships. So there are lots of issues related to romance and love. Yes, so there are breakups and so everything. Plus in the student society, I must say that there's lack of coping skills. Life skills like solving strategies are less, communication skills are reducing, social support system is reducing. So everything put together, I think they're under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, which finally could end in something like suicide.
Very well summed up at the very outset. Ms. Agarwala, is the fear of failure the biggest factor that leads to such depression, stress, or suicidal tendencies? What did you say?
It's not just the fear of failure. There are a multitude of reasons that the suicide is on the increase. And it's never been so pertinent than it has been in this generation. The British medical journal, The Lancet, actually reported in 2012 that India has the highest suicide rate amongst adolescents. So we definitely have a problem, and we definitely need to address it. And the sooner the better, actually.
The highest adolescent suicide rates in the country. How alarming is that, and does this reflect the kind of society we are in?
I think suicide has become like there has been a normalization of suicide, because we hear about suicide so much that we don't think it is something to be addressed anymore, and we start critiquing the person who's committed suicide and their circumstances. I think the primary reason for suicide is that success has become relative. We do not measure success in an individual capacity, for a person in context individually. We always measure, how successful are you when you're compared to your peers or your family, And what happens is that when people start to compare success, they're never happy because they think that they are not successful, even if they are. And for that matter, success itself is a very relative term. you know. So basically what is happening is that people are isolating themselves, and they just feel all the time that they are lacking somewhere. And this lack, for some people, you know, the feeling of lacking is so extreme that it drives them to a point of no return, and they commit suicide. They feel deprived in some way or the other, emotionally, socially, psychologically, and that is why this happens.
But Ranjan, can we even avoid this? I mean, just now Dr. Iqbal said success has become relative, but can we even avoid this in today's world, today's environment, today's society?
See,
is it even avoidable?
No, when you talk about from the student's perspective, it may not be avoidable, because unavoidable. Because see, like, who defines the success rate, or who defines what you should achieve or you should get? Basically, when we talk about adolescent age, like 15, 16, 17 or 19, so these are people who are appearing in different exams, they're studying, they're going in colleges or other institutes. But for them, suppose someone, the pressure coming from either from their home or maybe from schools or the institutes where they are. Now the success rate, they may not know who is a topper maybe, or what marks or the number they should get. But it's not, because then they are in problem because someone else from outside, basically it may be parents, maybe very close one, maybe teachers, or maybe even neighbor. So it difference for different students and young people. So they would come up and say that yes, you have to achieve certain things. So someone else comes and without comparing what or his or her strength, they put some certain mark or some benchmark. So now they're in confusion. The benchmark, had it been a participative discussion looking at my strength, if they say, okay, this is what you can achieve. But now the problem comes when you are given some target which you may not know your with own strength. So now somewhere they tell you in a way that you have to achieve this. And now I have, by this way or that way, I tried that, okay, somehow I have to achieve it. And if I achieve, well and good. But of course, if I am not competent enough, I cannot achieve that. So the result, of course, leads to depressions or other things, and then it relates to, again, I might attempt.
Absolutely. Misplaced priorities and targets. I'll come back to you, Dr. Datta.
Yes.
As individuals, as human beings, even when we are born, our natural tendency is to survive.
Yes.
Even a 2-hour-old baby is careful enough to ensure, it tries to cling on to you so that it doesn't fall off.
Yes.
I mean, that's the natural human tendency. So
Yes.
what happens? How does this change come? The same human being wants to kill himself or herself.
The father of psychology, Sigmund Freud, mentions suicide, or the tendency to commit suicide, as aggression turned inwards. Usually, aggression will not turn inwards. That's abnormal, that's pathological. But what happens, the primary cause of suicide in all age groups are psychological disorders. Here, I should mention primarily about depression and bipolar affective disorder. Bipolarity is a condition in psychiatry where there are two poles. Sometimes the person goes into depression, and sometimes he goes into hypomania or mania, which is the opposite of depression, too much of happiness, mood swings, etc. So these two reasons, depression and bipolar affective disorders, have been shown through research to be the primary or the leading causes of suicide in all age groups, if we talk about all age groups. But apart from that, other psychological disorders like schizophrenia, like personality disorders, let me talk about bipolar, it's called borderline personality disorder, where a person is emotionally unstable, is impulsive. Such people might also attempt and commit suicide sometimes impulsively. Here I must differentiate between what is called impulsive suicide and what is called a planned suicide. Some people, especially when we are talking about suicide in youngsters, among students, most of these suicides are impulsive in nature. Let's say they do not secure the required or expected grades in their exams, and out of an impulse, they sometimes attempt suicide, and that might become a completed suicide or a successful suicide. And however, planned suicide is different. For a long time, the person has been contemplating and thinking and planning, and then finally he commits suicide. So the primary cause of suicide is psychological disorders. Must mention about substance abuse here, because when we go through research articles, we see that alcohol abuse or any other substance abuse actually increases the chances of attempted suicide or committed suicide. So that is there. So youngsters nowadays use a lot of such substances. They are also prone to develop depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric illnesses. So that is also there. So now what happens, a normal human being will not go and commit suicide. Normal survival instinct will remain. But when a person is no longer, let's say, he's suffering from some kind of psychological pathology, then like depression, anxiety, or substance abuse, then he becomes more vulnerable to commit suicide. But let me mention here that the cause of suicide is not just biological, like I mentioned. There are psychological and social issues also. So far, the social and the family issues are concerned. Lack of a support system,
Absolutely.
lack of friends, lack of support system, degradation of value systems, moral issues, financial constraints, and of course, stress on a day-to-day basis. Everything plays a role.
If we restrict it to students, Ms. Agarwala, isn't it also the failure of the family, the educational institutes, the schools, the colleges, that because suicide doesn't happen overnight.
No.
It takes time, years, months, whatever. So isn't a complete failure of the family, the institutes, that it could not be prevented?
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, it's a collaboration of a few factors here, because families tend to have less communications, support, and so therefore the communication pathways break down. And the problem with our parents is we don't like to talk about suicide, because it's one of those subjects that we don't like to address, because it's not. We don't like to talk about it. So what we prefer to do is try to keep, and it's stigmatized. It's got a great stigma attached to it. So as a result, we're not open with it. We don't discuss it. We don't address it. So what happens to our children is they turn to the internet for their advice and guidance, and we lose the connect with the parents. So yes, I agree. It's a concern of the parents and the families. It's a concern of the schools. They definitely have to put in their two-penny bit. And moreover, the child themselves. They must have the skills, the coping skills. I mean, fair enough, life has moved on. We're all working, we're all now in the millennium. But until we realize that life is precious, there has to be self-responsibility. We have to face our problems head on, and we must have the patience to see through everything that faces us.
Is it? I'll just come back to you, Dr. Datta.
Like
is it also
emphasize on something here, like she mentioned and even I mentioned. See, stresses are increasing. That's undoubtedly increasing. But do we have the adequate coping skills to face those stresses in life? No. So we need to actually, when we talk about parenting skills, when we talk about upbringing, we definitely have to instill proper life skills in the form of anger management, in the form of communication skills, problem-solving skills, conflict resolution skills, etc. Because a lot of such students who actually commit suicide, you mentioned a short while back that it doesn't happen overnight, but impulsively when they attempt suicide, it could just happen in a very short span of time, because perhaps they never thought about killing themselves, but suddenly they have a breakup in a relationship and they find no meaning in life. And they don't have adequate coping skills. They don't have friends to go back to, to talk to someone. They don't have a friend. They don't have parents. Maybe they don't have share a proper bond with their parents. So what happens is impulsively they attempt a suicide. They perhaps never, it was not a premeditated kind of step. And then they succeed. So many times we have to understand in case of students that with the rising stresses and strains in life, we need to increase their coping skills and coping mechanisms.
Now, is the problem also increasing because usually the common perception with parents is that, no, my son or my daughter is not going to do that. I mean, they don't even address the issue, don't even recognize the problem. They think, no, it's not possible. And that's why they never thought of addressing, they probably never thought it would go to that extent. That is the common perception in the society.
Yes, that is a common perception. Apart from that, a lot of students, youngsters, since we're talking about youngsters here, a lot of youngsters who actually attempt and commit suicide may not even talk about it. Correct. May not even talk about it. They might just be doing it very silently, people may not even be able to make out. And especially in families, like in nuclear families we live these days, so where people don't even share a meal in the family, which is very sad. So they'll not be able to assess or notice the changes in the student or their children. Maybe the child is depressed, maybe the child is angry, maybe the child is into some kind of addiction. Nobody knows. So the child is suffering silently, and someday he ends his life. So that is there. And apart from that, a lot of students also talk about dying and death wish. Let me tell you this. So they can talk about this to parents, they can talk about this to teachers, their friends, etc. I feel like killing myself. I don't feel like living anymore. So sometimes these, when they talk about this could be mere threats, this could be attention-seeking behavior. Not everything that is said is true, but this must not be taken lightly at all. If someone talks about killing himself or herself, if someone talks about death wish, this must be taken seriously. Parents and teachers must talk openly, even friends must talk openly, find out what's happening within the minds of these individuals and really find out if there is something serious or not.
I would like to add to what Dr. Datta just said, because, I remember when I was in college, I had this friend, and we sat in English class one day. The next day in the morning, just the immediate day after we had a class together, I get the news that she has committed suicide. And when she sat next to me in class, her behavior was absolutely normal. You know, and she was talking as like any other day. There was no hint of any kind of disturbance, psychological trauma, nothing. In fact, you know, she and I, we had participated in a debate competition together, and we had won the best prize, you know, the first prize. And she was telling me that, Sabrina, please don't go to other debates, leaving me. We are a team now, we'll do it all together. And the next day, immediate next day, I get the news that she has committed suicide. That was a shock to me, you know, because I could never anticipate from the way she was behaving with me the previous day, you know, that she had something so disturbing going on in her mind, you know. And I believe that I should have been able to sense at least a little bit of something, given that the disturbance was of such an extreme nature. And like again Dr. Datta said, you know, when somebody talks about killing themselves, now, you know, there is a particular forwarded message going on Facebook that, you know, I'm always listening. A person is always listening to you. So in case anybody needs to talk, people are forwarding and pasting these messages on their walls that, you know, I'm here for you in case you need to talk. In this context, you know, being from the academia, I would like to say that, you know, when we teach Marx in political theory, Marx talks about something called alienation, you know, and he talks about alienation as a result of capitalism. The pursuit for profit has become so extreme that, you know, people ultimately tend to be alienated from, you know, the production process, the object of production, from nature, from fellow beings, and ultimately from themselves. And I believe this is one of the very, very primary causes of suicide. And in this context, you know, I would like to talk about a very sad case of suicide, which I think took place the last year, the year before that, I don't exactly recall. The suicide committed by an IS officer called Mukesh Pandey. You know, when you look from the outside, he looks so accomplished, happy in his life, in his professional career. But then, you know, when you see the video, he's ultimately saying that, you know, when you have no purpose to live, it is ultimately futile. And that is why he ended his life. When you look from the outside, he has an accomplished career, he has a wife, he has a child, you know, so everything that looks like it is not exactly it. There are many underlying layers, you know, and
appearances can be often deceptive.
Exactly.
Yes, and just adding to what she said about Marx, there is someone called Emily Durkheim, you know, who has given theories on suicide. She talked about, she referred to this as egoistic suicide, where a person loses contact with the social values and does not remain integrated with the society.
Lot of introverts, and of course, maybe sometime or the other they didn't have anyone to listen to them, to their ideas, to their thoughts, and that adds up. We'll have to take a very short break here. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Beyond the Bytes. We're discussing the rising stress levels on students today, driving them to even suicide. I'll come back to you, Ms. Loya Agarwala. As a society in this country, you know, where there's so much of competition, be it anywhere, be it in admission for schools, for colleges, for engineering courses, for medical courses, and then jobs. As a society, are we shy of giving a second chance to anyone? Is that the perception? And is that what drives these youngsters to do what they shouldn't be doing? Because they think that this is the end of it. I'm doomed.
Right. Yeah, and this has become a mindset. You see, we've inculcated this mindset into our children that the pinnacle of success is a good mark sheet. You know, as a result, you've got to get to the best institution in order to be so-called open quote successful. And we have to break barriers here. We have to break these stereotypes because it cannot be so. You know, there are so many successful people in this world that have done it a different way, not the traditional mindset. So again, we need to take it back to schools and to parents and the society at large to explain to them that the unfortunate drawback of this mindset is the increasing suicide rate of our children. And until we can, you know, actually sit down and realize that we need to reconstruct everything right from scratch, unfortunately, these kind of statistics are going to increase. And that is the sad truth of it.
But Ranjan, do you even see that happening? I mean, we can say such things in a show or a forum or a platform or a seminar, and it all sounds good. But as a parent, you know, probably the same people wouldn't go back and say the same kind of things to their children. They would say, no, you have to buck up, you have to do well, there's so much of competition, you'll be left out, you'll be nowhere, you know, these kind of things. So are we even heading that way, especially in schools, especially in our schools and even colleges?
From my experience, no. Because it's like Look at the number of, like, we have very few psychiatrists, we have very few psychologists. Suppose something happens at home. Suppose I'm just coming from home, and then you need to consult someone. We don't have trained individuals who can, you have few, but not many to guide them or mentor them properly. So like at the end, again, whatever we talk in a seminar or in a big way, all wants to be big shot, all wants to say good things. When you come down to home, we become selfish. And then I try to look at my own success. So like in a forum, and the base part, people who speak more in seminar and people who speak more in workshop, they do opposite at home. So if I say I have to...
I don't agree.
That's
most of the time.
Most of the time,
most of the time. Because like if I say I have to clean everything, and see that carbon footprint of that person would be more to contributing towards climate change. So everyone, somehow, I'm saying not only this part, there are, with due respect to all people who abide by what they speak, but many times we have seen, they speak something different. Now what happens, like suppose getting good marks, getting success, getting a good report card from school. So like parents, they might say something, but when it comes to, most of the time when I communicate with a lot of young people, a lot of students, they say this thing. And it's very unfortunate that in many times, I have seen this word suicide in their message somewhere, which is unfortunate. I said, no, this should be eliminated. You should not talk about this thing. It's not that they are going to do it. I'm not saying whether, but somewhere feeling like, committing suicide. So which is very dangerous, because if the word comes to your mind, that might lead to a dangerous thing. Because it's when already you have spoken like committing suicide and attempt. Both things are different. So what I see is that what we are supposed to do is not being done in the real sense at home or in schools or institutes. To avoid
Can
it.
I just come in here? Because when it comes to when it comes to talking about suicide or death wish or whatever, see, nowadays students have an access to the internet, so they can actually they have an access to anything. Like they can know about suicide, they can know about the methods of attempting it, committing it, etc. So I think it's more about increasing awareness and empowering them. And when you know about things and yet you don't do, you are called empowered instead of being ignorant.
No,
I would go by it.
Awareness is there, but what about the action? Awareness leading to action.
I would like to bring in
specifically mentioned in psychiatry books that talking about death or death wish or suicide actually does not instill the idea into the mind of someone who's not thinking about it already. So we cannot actually make someone commit suicide when the person is not suicidal or not depressed. And sometimes even when we don't talk about it, the person might be so depressed, might be suffering from within, might actually go and attempt suicide. So that's what books say.
I would like to actually address what is the topic from a different dimension. I think, there has been a kind of trivialization of the idea, because, of course, there are people who are actually in intense emotional trauma who go ahead with the decision. But, I have seen students commit suicide. Your parents don't give them a bike, they commit suicide. They don't get an Apple iPhone, they commit suicide.
Do this has already happened. Or do they attempt suicide?
No, they commit suicide. This has happened. Okay. This has happened. I know of 2-3 cases personally, where this has happened. Now, the idea is that, basically, I think social conditioning and socialization also goes to a very long extent in kind of conditioning and framing the mindset of a person. Like they say, the same boiling water which softens the potato hardens the egg. So I think, it is about the social conditioning of a person, how one perceives of the idea. Just because a person has faced difficult circumstances or is an emotional trauma does not mean that that person will go ahead with suicide. I believe Dr. Datta will be able to shed more light on the emotional and the psychological aspect, but I just think that social conditioning and socialization and trivialization of the idea that you don't have something superficial, you go and play with your life. The people do not realize that once you actually take your life, you can't have it back. They don't realize the value of life. You have people fighting for their life in hospitals every day, and these people have their life in their hands and they're just giving it up for nothing. That is something, a very serious dimension which needs to be addressed.
Committing suicide, like she mentioned, for very trivial issues, that can be a signal or of low frustration tolerance. They can't even tolerate
basic levels.
So
basic that's again a problem with
that is again a lack of coping skills. Okay, that's how they have been brought up.
Yes.
So definitely we have to emphasize more on
socialization
parenting
and comes back to parenting ultimately.
Everything. Everything comes in there. And apart from that, I would just like to mention about something we call deliberate self-harm, DSH, briefly. So there are a lot of students who actually don't commit suicide. She talked about commission of suicide, who attempt suicide or they pretend to attempt suicide just to seek attention from their parents and to gain what they want or what they desire. Let's say slashing of wrist, banging of the head, or ingesting sleeping pills, not in inadequate amounts, which will not kill them, but then which will frighten the people around them. So a lot of such incidents keep happening. We have to understand that this is because of some kind of impairment in personalities. So proper counseling and taking them to proper consultation with mental health professionals also becomes very important in such cases.
I think the biggest word here is intent or intention. Self-harm and suicide are two different things.
Yes.
Only because of the intent behind the action.
Therefore, when we talk about suicide, we mention two words. One is intentionality and the other is lethality. So intentionality, does the person actually intend to end his or her own life? Lethality, what was the method used? Because in India, the commonest methods used are actually pesticide poisoning and hanging. But in the West, it's firearms. So firearms are much more lethal, considered to be much more lethal. Plus, I must also mention this, maybe I'm digressing a bit, but males attempt suicide much less frequently as compared to females, but they complete suicide much more.
Yeah.
But females, it's 4:1. Females attempt more, die less, they complete less. So that needs to be understood too.
When we are talking about suicide statistics, according to the World Health Organization, the recent statistics state that there are about 8 lakh suicides per year all across the world, and 1,35,000 take place in India.
Yes.
Which is very high number.
Suicide amongst youngsters is highest in India, which is 35.5 per 1 lakh population.
Correct. That is unimaginable.
That speaks for itself. That speaks for itself, the kind of competition, the kind of stress. If you deal every moment, daily.
But one thing I add on, that World Health Organization took a decade long to have this study. But I don't know, make me correct, we have no authentic data in Assam or Northeast. We have less data and less research.
But we have frequent incidents.
Yeah, but so somewhere, maybe when we know the problem, so we also look at from history, like what WHO in 2015 said India is a suicide capital. And they took nearly 10 years to do research and study. Similar kind of thing, like mental health professionals and other institutes need to come in and do research and survey also in Assam and the other, our region. So that we need to know from the historical thing.
Can we get back to the basics here?
Yeah.
Can't the parents say the right kind of things to their words to their kids at the right time? Be practical. Let's be practical. Yes, you have to achieve. You have to achieve the world, but not at the cost of your life.
Absolutely.
There's always a second chance. There's only a third chance, a fourth chance. As long as you are alive, there's a chance.
Life is
Can't
a big
we just
phenomenon.
do that?
Life is a huge phenomenon. Everything else is a small part of life. That needs to be taught. Life is the big canvas.
Exactly. That's a very good way of putting it, because small failures cannot determine the roadmap of your entire life. We are bound to have failures. We can never have a life which is full of successes and no setbacks. But these are the people who go ahead because they've had setbacks in life and they can't take it. The medical terminology, Dr. Datta said, is low level of frustration tolerance. And I think, a very important area which should be addressed in this context is that there is a very I don't know what is the right word, trauma or a taboo or, social ostracization about going to a medical professional for help if you have mental issues, if you have problems of depression, psychological issues. There's a very big trauma because, every time you talk about taking a person who's emotionally disturbed to the, doctor, to the psychiatrist, they will say that I'm not mad. Because there is the perception that you go to a doctor only when you are mad.
An insane person comes to a psychiatrist.
Yes, and I think
that is changing gradually.
Yes, it is changing, but the rates of change are very negligible. I think we should take cue from the West, because every person, they say that I'm going into therapy. I need my therapist, because that is something which is very normal. We all have our issues, and we deal with our issues differently. And ultimately, people who can't deal with the issues are the ones who go into such extreme steps. So, you know, the idea of naturalizing or normalizing therapy is very important. We all have times when we, you know, are crying in the night. It is all very normal for us. But some people, it is extreme, and they need to kind of get used to the idea that it's okay to see a doctor. Just like physical health problems, mental health problems are also a reality which can be addressed.
Probably.
And sometimes it's okay to see a doctor or a mental health professional even if you're totally normal and you're not
Absolutely,
crying at night.
absolutely,
But
yes.
you just need to share with someone
Yes.
who's neutral
Yes.
and somebody who's trained.
A yearly checkup does no harm.
Yes, yes.
You know,
No
actually,
harm, no loss.
I'm actually reminded of the movie Dear Zindagi, where they have actually
Yes.
tried to portray the idea how this young girl goes to a doctor just because she's dealing with some issues and she doesn't know. And then, you know, it comes out that what is the core of her frustration.
There's another reason. It just reminds me of some. There's another reason as to why people don't go and see a mental health professional. It's not just a stigma. It's not just the basic notion that only mad people go to see a mental health professional. It's also because depression, anxiety, or feelings of killing oneself or feelings like that, it's considered to be a sign of mental weakness and not mental illness.
Okay, okay.
You know, they say you have a weak mind.
Yes.
So strengthen your mind.
Yes.
Everything will be all right.
Yes.
But they don't understand there's a biology to it. You know, people who commit suicide or attempt suicide, they're at higher risk of committing or attempting suicide when there's a family history of suicide.
Right.
Yes.
There's a higher risk when there are previous attempts at committing suicide.
Okay.
Yes.
And there's a genetic risk to it also. So we cannot completely ignore the biological part of it, because everything in psychiatry and psychology these days is explained by the biopsychosocial model, which means there's a biological part, there's a psychological part, and there's a social part too.
Absolutely.
Now, Ranjan, coming back to the figures, in India has the highest suicide rate among adolescents, and it extends to the age of 29. 15 to 29, India has one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Is it because of that idea, of that perception that your time is running out, when they say, you are 19 now, at 25 you cannot sit for this competitive exam, once you are 29 you cannot attempt for civil services, you cannot attempt for your staff selection, you cannot attempt for CDS, so time is running out. Your life will be finished.
Correct.
By the time you are 30, you are finished. If you don't
get
do
anything, you're
Done.
finished.
You're done.
Is that one
You
of the
don't
main
have
reasons?
plan B. Okay, you
Absolutely.
just have plan A.
Absolutely.
It fails.
Absolutely.
So you're
done.
gone. You're out of the
done.
race, and no one will talk to you. No one will
Absolutely.
give you
Absolutely.
respect. That happens, and then you see, this is what we learned from our past, and it's all about if you are told that we don't talk about the options that we have. So when being from the career perspective, when we discuss these things, so life never ends anywhere. Till we are alive, life rolls on, life goes on. But someone, people, they come and they talk. That's why when you said the previous one, the parents, they do not have sufficient counseling. If a student is not doing good, we say that the students need counseling. At the same time, I feel the parents or guardians,
Yes.
they equally need counseling.
Yes.
So that whatever they learn, they can pass it nicely on to their son or daughter. But the problem is that they will more focus on the kids, that is, you have to get counseling, you have to do this, you have to get training.
In fact, even
In fact,
Yeah.
I mean, sorry.
Go ahead.
But I see a lot of parents who come to me with their children, I mean, who are adolescents, and tell me that, doctor, please counsel my child, daughter or son. And when we talk, have a word with the concerned, boy or girl, we realize that he or she is near normal, but the parents actually need counseling.
More counseling.
Can I just butt in here? I just wish to give a little bit of practical advice to the parents that are listening.
Yeah.
I would like to say these 4 things. You've got to teach your child how to manage their emotions.
Absolutely.
Emotional management, number
Yes,
1.
yes.
Stress management, number 2.
Yes.
Number 3, open communication pathways with your child at all
Absolutely.
times.
Very,
And
very
finally,
important.
self-responsibility.
Yes.
Every life is precious. Our lives are precious. We
Exactly.
don't want to die. Nobody
Exactly.
wants to die. The human
Exactly.
body tries to survive,
Survive.
even during
Yes.
a suicide
most
attempt.
trying of circumstances.
Absolutely.
I-
So where is this precious? Where is this understanding of the value of life? So we
Yes.
must inculcate this, and parents, I earnest appeal to parents
Yes.
to do that to each child.
Yes.
In fact,
I just
yeah.
one point with what Mr. Bora said, about the idea of committing suicide, like Dr. Datta also said, there's no plan B. So basically what happens, we have learned to measure success or happiness very unidimensionally.
Absolutely.
There are no 2 or more dimensions to it. And once you're 30,
Unless you
you're 30
discover it accidentally.
accidentally. So basically, in terms of, when we talk about, for example, development of countries, we usually used to go by the models of GDP, GNP, NNP, etc. But now, Bhutan, being the first country, has come up with a happiness index. meaning that you can only develop, you can only measure development when you actually measure quotients like happiness.
Absolutely.
So in case of individuals also, I believe it works like that.
And the Western
you cannot be considered
much higher than in the US.
You cannot be considered, as an accomplished individual if you have no levels of happiness.
And we are not a very happy nation.
Yes,
so far happiness index is
By no
concerned.
means.
So these things are important to take into account when we're talking about individual success, happiness, satisfaction, accomplishment, because, we do not consider emotional stability as a quotient to measure success.
Yes.
Emotional stability, happiness, personal fulfillment. I'm reminded of what Abraham Maslow talks about. He talks about this pyramid of needs.
Yes. Yes.
At the bottom there's physiological needs, and at the top there's the need of self-actualization. A lot of us, we are very busy fulfilling the lower level of needs, but we do not go up till self-actualization.
Yes.
And the lack of self-actualization and the theory of anomie, the lack of belongingness somewhere. You feel that you belong nowhere. You say, the question, why me? I'm stuck in between of nowhere. These kind of emotions ultimately, they accelerate, they escalate, and they manifest in such, things like ending one's life.
The suicide that we talked about in case of that IS officer, that's actually an anomic suicide.
Yes,
Where,
absolutely.
people cannot handle disillusionment, disappointments. They are achievers otherwise. But they find that life is meaningless and they end their lives. That is there. And so far as quotients are concerned, happiness index is one, yes. But, we talk about these days, we talk about emotional intelligence, we talk about spiritual quotients also. So earlier it was like when we talk about a student, what is his IQ? Is he brilliant enough? How much will he achieve? Etc. etc. But these days we see that people even with high IQs may not be good achievers, and more importantly, they may not be happy.
Absolutely.
So they need proper EQs where they're emotionally stable. They can show the right emotions at the right time for the right purpose in the right direction.
Yes.
And second thing, their spiritual quotients need to be emphasized on. If they are spiritually, more sound, their SQs are high, then I'm sure their moral values will be stronger. Their value systems will be stronger. And they will rather fight it out instead of, being an escapist and going towards suicide.
This is very important in what Navarun had just said, about parents and students. When they go to counselors and medical professionals, actually different ways of alternative lifestyles need to be emphasized.
Yes.
They need to be highlighted that, you should send your children or maybe go yourself to centers where there are meditation. There is yoga. To cope up with these exceeding stresses, levels of stress in life. That will help.
And different things work for different people.
Yes.
So they can try out.
Yes.
Not
Absolutely.
It
probably all boils down to a good environment at home that can go a long way in avoiding such tragedies. We'll take a very short break on this note. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Beyond the Bites. We're discussing the increasing stress level on our youngsters, our students, which is even driving them to suicide. Ranjan, even a decade and a half earlier, any successful entrepreneur or doing any kind of activity, that is beyond, the normal course, he would say, I made this accidentally. I stepped into this profession accidentally. Of course, now things are changing. We have a lot of IITians, people from IIM choosing not to work, starting their own ventures. Right. Obviously, times are changing, but even a decade and a half ago, things were different. Doesn't this speak volumes of how one-track we are when it comes to pursuing our careers?
No, that's true, because it's like...
And that is especially true probably for the region.
Of course, it's more or less
for varied reasons.
Correct.
For many
there
reasons.
are many reasons, but we are when we are studying and we want to get a job, we dream for a government job. That's the first choice. There is no other choice. So if you don't get, then somehow needs to get some employment. But then taking up new venture, taking up something unique, offbeat, then you will be said as a mad guy. Wherever you start something, this guy is something mad, he's not doing or she's not doing what he or she is supposed to do. So because then, and moreover, they do not have a role models in front of them to see and say that, okay, now we have certain things. A lot of successful entrepreneurs are there whom we can see. We can have different plans now. Not necessarily finishing engineering, you have to only work with the engineering perspective. Finishing health profession doesn't mean only you have to do that. Many have come up and now started their farmings and all. So the thing is that from very beginning, you can show them that there are different options available.
Absolutely. Why should it happen when they failed in something and now let's try something else?
And not necessarily
why can't we show them, there are these many things, there are these many paths you can take from the very beginning. So many options open. Okay, I have 10 options instead of just 2.
Right. So
And that
these
makes
are
them
these
feel
are
that
not
much
available.
better.
These are available. But the thing is that who take it out, who like taking it to the students in a true sense is important. Some people can, yes, they have a lot of information, access to information, fine. But then accessing information is not the power. Utilizing those information in proper way is the power. So you need, again, mentors, you need people. So those things like, now we have the options are available. But more activities to be done so that they are convinced and then take up these things so that the tendency of suiciding or finishing would go down.
Dr. Sirkar, have our schools, our colleges, our universities failed in this regard, especially the humanities? Have they failed in this regard to enlighten, to be a pathfinder, path shower for the students?
I wouldn't say that the educational institutions have failed, because I am very much a part of educational institution and I can see it on a very daily basis how it is happening, how it is operating. What we tend to do is that we go and we try to reach out to the students. Earlier, I would like to say that, when it is a school or it is a college or it is a university, the relationship between the students and the teachers would be a very limited one within the classroom. But now we are trying to kind of broaden the horizons. We do not restrict ourselves only to classroom teaching. I have very amicable relations with my students. We go out even for coffee after class, we meet casually. What I'm trying to say is that we have actually tried to develop a very approachable, friendly and amicable culture with the students, which helps them talk to us beyond the classroom, beyond the academic dimensions. And I believe that it is not only me, it is all the departments, because now we are actually trying to build a culture which is people friendly. Which is student friendly.
I beg to differ, Sabrina,
Okay.
because I feel our institutions have failed in the sense that, I grew up in England and we grew up with knowing that social skills was an actual subject, and we learned, and it was consistent, it was right across. Fair enough, we were very on good terms with our teachers, but our teachers were not trained to handle these kinds of issues, and therefore, emotional intelligence was something we learned from a young age. We knew that. We knew what the skills were, and we were able to inculcate those skills within ourselves over a long period of time. These weren't just one-day workshops. These were, every week we had a class. This is why I've had to open up my own institute.
So
for this very
basically,
reason.
But I would just like to
Yeah.
address to what Ms. Agarwala said. Maybe you've had such an experience. Definitely, it's possible. But what happens is that in the institutions of higher learning in this part of the country, I can speak for it because I've been associated with them. And what is happening is that the idea is to go beyond classroom teaching. And like she said about EQ and IQ, everything is included in that. So basically, what is happening is that there are special programs even for the teachers, so that they are sensitized to the issues of the students. And a large number of teachers are actually inspired and motivated by the admin and by the higher, authorities, to take up these courses so that they can actually understand what the students are going through. So maybe I am also very new to the academia. It's hardly been 6 to 7 years.
Well,
but
probably,
in these
probably
6
you
to
can
7
speak.
years,
You
there
can
has
speak
been,
for your university. Probably you can
yes,
speak for your university.
there
But then
has been a development of the culture. Maybe it will take some time to get there, but I think we've begun somewhere.
Yeah.
But,
Yes.
but clearly our education institutes have not moved on.
Very
Probably,
slow,
probably
very slow.
30 years back there's no need for any such department or thing. But probably
It's
today
perhaps
it
not
is the
being
need.
able to keep pace with
Yeah.
the rising stress.
Yes.
No,
and
except
the anxiety.
I mean, we are the most
Parallelly-
stressed out nation
Yes, yes,
on
yes,
this
we are.
on this globe, so to say.
Obviously.
And it's high time that we should move on. We should have these kind
Yes.
of things in the institutes. And the most important thing for the institutes is to make the students feel that whatever they're doing, they should take pride in that.
Exactly.
Only they are responsible for their lives. It doesn't matter who thinks
And
what.
every child, every student, every human being has their own capabilities, capacities and their limitations. We often point out the limitations to a student. You were supposed to achieve this, you couldn't. Look at the other guy. He's done this. So we must tell him, actually, we must make him aware of his qualities too. Somebody could be weak in a particular subject, but could be very well skilled in something else. So it's our responsibility to actually bring out hidden talents.
No, but do we have enough resources to do that?
We don't, but at least, we are today we are talking about it. Awareness is getting
Absolutely.
built up. And then gradually we must move in that direction. Otherwise, we'll be nowhere. Otherwise.
In this context with Dr. Datta said, I would like to slightly differ again, because, when we have been, I have seen many departments in my university and Guwahati University as well. A lot of students, they come to us and they said that, ma'am, we did not fare as we expected to. The only thing, we try to say that these are not important. These marks, these percentages are not important, because in a year's time, nobody will remember how much you scored. You know, the culture, what I'm trying to say is that gradually changing over here.
Because
you know,
changing. But Dr. Sabrina, I'm not talking about very liberal and teachers like you. I'm talking about even teachers in the school. You know,
I think what you say.
I've come across people from rural backgrounds.
Yes. In the schools, it is very much applicable. In the schools, this is happening.
Because awareness of those teachers is very important also.
But absolutely agree. But you know, in the institutions of higher learning, we are trying to kind of unlearn these things.
Definitely,
we are trying to break the stereotype that your marks will determine who you are. We are trying to do that.
Now,
especially in the institutions of higher learning.
We have somebody here who cracks the IIT, joins, or an IIM for that matter, realizes it's not his or her cup of tea, decides against it. Probably the family is not willing. Family believes that you can do it. Since you have cracked it, so you can do it. You have it new. Okay? This is where probably the institute's role comes in, a larger role, a bigger role. But that is not happening because the institute does not have time for that.
No, of course, in Assam, not time, and except few teachers. Again, I come back. And except few teachers, most are not interested in all these things. They are only interested in what they are supposed to teach. See, somewhere you have to also go beyond teaching, like what she was saying. So, most of the government teachers, especially if you look at the government institutes, be it schools, colleges, or whatever, so their main task is just they do their task and they go back. So, what happens is that the truth spread the way they are supposed to be. And now what do we have now? Psychology as a department. Psychiatry, of course, the health department is different, but psychology as a department has started now. Guwahati University has, Cotton University has. So last time also in one of the meetings I was saying that what these students can take up now as a part of their own internship or as a part of their project. They can start their mobile, like we have health camp. Like, you know, for other, so these institutes or these particular subject students, they can go to different schools, even maybe rural areas, others, and they can have that health camp with the mental health issues. So it's an options for them, opportunities, because see, we have problem as suicide being depression. This is a serious issue, and we have to tackle it. So one thing which can be done by, if not by other department, at least the psychology department, they can do it. But you look at how are they really happening? Very less. They have one or two programs, but not often.
There is another dimension. I would just take 2 minutes to add, you know. I think more than the educational institutions, there's a culture all around us which kind of emphasizes achievers in terms of marks and professions. You know, because the newspapers are flooded with, you know, people who have topped, people who have been placed in England, America, Switzerland, things like that, who are IS officers, who are ACS officers. So these kind of things, you know, they make more of a difference, you know, because we are nurturing a culture of competition.
Yes.
I think that is the greater problem.
How many toppers actually become successful even in their professional fields in life?
Exactly.
Because a lot of them are burnt out by the time they actually get into something.
Absolutely.
So it's very necessary to, you know, set the right kind of example and also be role models.
You know, I'm just reminded of this ad which I saw on TV yesterday, and I was very irritated because, you know, there's a guy who comes, and it is for a coaching institute, and he comes, he says in Hindi, "Koi bhi doctor ya engineer ek hi din mein nahi ban jata." You know what my problem is? What the problem is not about professions. The problem is the glorifying of certain professions and setting them as benchmarks. That if you're not these, you are lesser. You know, and if you're not these, again you're lesser. You know, basically assessing the individual on the kind of professions and passions they take up. We have, like, you know, Dr. Agarwala said, we have to learn to nurture human life, value human life. Why do we not give importance for people as people? Why on the basis of what they achieve, how educated they are? And that is what kind of devalues human life.
Is the region still stuck with the doctor-engineer mindset?
It was a couple
of decades ago.
Yes and no.
It is,
but
but
I
don't think you can stop
but not the same way as it was earlier.
You know, I would like to just, like, a very small incident comes to my mind. When I had gone to Delhi to study my graduation, you know, I have to say this because, you know, I had a 93%, you know, in 2002. And when I went to drop my application in one of the colleges, the person who took my application said, "Why are you studying humanities?" This is what he said to me. So there is a mindset which still believes that if you're good in studies, you have to go for the sciences. So, you know, it starts from there. And ultimately, you know, it is definitely lessening, but it starts from there. the kind of, you know, lessening and devaluing of people on the basis of the choices they make. And ultimately, if you are not something which is considered as a conventional or accomplished profession or passion, you are actually not an achiever in conventional terms.
See, there
And
are a lot of...
sometimes when we talk about, before I forget it, when we talk about student suicide or adolescent suicide, sometimes we see that suicide is being glamorized and romanticized also
Yes, yes,
in
yes.
movies, in media, through internet, etc. So, you know, through these kind of things, you know, these are methods through which we can create impressions. So there's something called copycat suicides. You know, sometimes when suicide is being repeatedly shown, the method used, why suicide was attempted, how suicide was committed, it is shown, research shows that a lot many other suicides also happen. It follows. So basically, suicide must not be romanticized, must not be glorified at all. It is something, I call it escapism. Okay?
Yes,
It
absolutely.
is preventable.
I agree.
It is preventable.
Navarun, just
Value
allow me-
systems need to be empowered, strengthened, and that way we can prevent.
Yes.
Yeah, just allow me, I feel compelled to say something. I do agree that, you know, all of this is very wrong for our children, but it's not about stopping media. We can't do that. We can't stop
Absolutely,
media. It's going to
absolutely.
keep on happening forever. So
I'm
where
talking
do we...
about glorification.
No, but we need to
Yes.
stop we need to empower. That is the key. We empower our children. We tell them that, yes, these are all the bad things, you know, but you don't have to, don't believe it, don't do it, and certainly
cannot
don't
put a
become
do
a
and
part
don't
of
on
it.
everything. I
What
mean,
is
let's
it
accept
that-
it.
Yeah,
What
but
Dr.
only
Let's accept
said.
it.
recently, I think a few months back, there was this game.
Exactly, that
which
is what I was
Blue
going to
whale.
say.
Blue
Blue
Yeah.
whale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Blue
that
whale.
was a kind of glorification of
Yes,
suicide,
yes,
you know, I mean,
yes.
these two things shouldn't be done.
And you know,
at all.
there was a rule in that particular game, from what I've read, that you cannot quit it. There are
Yes.
many
You cannot.
stages. There are
Yes.
many stages, and the last stage is that you have to commit suicide. And if you do not commit suicide, quote unquote, you chicken out.
Exactly.
You know? So
And-
people
and
would not
everybody
like
heads
that
towards
tag.
suicide that
Like
way.
you
See, to
said,
me-
it is
How can you glorify
romanticizing.
suicide that way?
To me, if you see it for students, if we take the example of students,
Yes.
the day the society looks at an engineering student
Yes.
and a humanities student equally, you know, accepts them both as equal, I think a lot of our problems will be sorted out as far as these student suicides are concerned. And IITian might feel, look, I have an option. I have
On a
an
lighter
option to
note,
go
can I
back.
say something?
Please.
There are a lot of students who come to me and then they say they want to study humanities. Okay, so people, you know, everything is changing, psyche is changing.
They want to study, but
Yes.
are their parents
That's
willing to allow them to study?
parents,
That's the
actually,
bigger, that's the bigger question.
The change is definitely coming.
Yes.
Yes,
The change is
slowly. I'm so
definitely
happy the
coming.
change is happening
Yes,
slowly.
but you know, we still have a certain way to go. Till
Yes,
the
that's
psyche,
where-
till the traditional
That's
psyche
where-
of considering humanities as lesser than the sciences is
we must,
uprooted.
and we must take into account the aptitude of a student, because Ranjan would be able to
Absolutely,
say that. You know,
absolutely.
it's not about
And-
intelligence,
and-
it's
and
about
that's where
aptitude.
the
And
role-
interest as well. Aptitude,
interest and
patience,
aptitude, both.
passion.
Yes.
That's where the role of teachers like you, counselors like you
Yes.
come
Right.
to show the right path.
Correct. But that's also, you know, to be honest, again, we have very less people here. Trained people are very less. Whether you talk about counselor or teachers who really lead with the examples are very few. So that's why we'll need some more time when they will
Because the
take up-
idea is to show the kind of
So-
avenues they have,
Correct.
the kind of
Yes.
avenues available for them even
Right.
if they pursue humanities. That is not happening.
Right.
And
And
you know,
we have to train the trainers.
Even
and it's
even
not only
uh,
showing the part, but at the end when they finish it, what else they're going to do it.
I think
So we need to do more on that part. Even counselors, as a counselor, I feel a lot of things to be done, a lot of research for even ourselves. And
See,
bringing
I'll tell
opportunity.
you from my personal experience. When I was pursuing my degree course in English honors, you know, there are people telling me you have to study long, do your PhD, clear your net or whatever. That's a long thing. Or you have to work in some private school. That's your future. Okay, but that's not it. That's the picture we have been given in the region
Right.
year after year. Things are changing slowly, yes, but that still remains.
Yes.
That's why the glorification of these professions,
Let
the
others not
medical.
decide your future.
Yeah.
Yes, that is
You must
something
chase
very
your own
important
dreams.
when it comes to students who have just done their 12th. You know, a lot of times they're forced to do things and study things they're not interested in.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
because their parents or their family wants them to do so, and ultimately the frustration which results from
okay,
that.
Okay, yes, yes. Last words from you. We're running out of time. What is the way out? Your advice to parents, teachers, very quickly.
See, we have talked about prevention, we have talked about the factors, risk factors, etc. But this just reminds me of what George Bernard Shaw had said. You see things and say why, but I dream of things that never were and say why not. So let's ask why not and start changing the scene.
That's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
From my side, it would be awareness, building up awareness in schools, societies, everywhere. And secondly, to know how to recognize and respond to the signs of suicide. And thirdly, every one of us to have individual effort. So ultimately, we can hopefully make a change in this world. Yes.
Definitely.
I think that the perceptions relating to socialization and social conditioning need to be adapted. We need to value people for people, and we need to understand that the roots of frustration come from the ideas of capitalism, competition, and profit. So that has to go. People have to learn to live for themselves, be happy for themselves, and learn to value their lives for themselves.
As we said, no, it's like it also brings opportunity for people who are working against it. Like people who have attempted suicide. Now, we have opportunity to work with them, to understand, to identify, so that nothing happens for the next person. If in 2015, who said that India is the suicide capital, let us be its challenge for everyone, psychiatrists, psychologists, teachers, counselors, civil society, media, to make it no suicide capital, and let us, everyone, take up the challenge to take that next decade would be, we should bring it to zero from what we have now.
Let us work hand in hand.
Yes.
Absolutely. Life brings with itself immense possibilities. If you're alive, you can do wonders. This life is very valuable. The society should understand this. Our parents, teachers, everybody should understand this. It's important to live. If you're alive, you can achieve a lot. This is the message we'd like to give today from this show of the Beyond the Bites. Do join us at the same time next week. Till then, stay well, stay safe.